Hi there, welcome to lesson 4 in module 4, and we're looking at clarity again. We had already mentioned that that's one of the checks we do when we want to check for data quality. We're checking for clarity and we're using two commands in this lesson. There's one called the describe command and the other one is called the codebook command. So let's dive in straight away. The describe command gives summary information about the variables in the data set. So I'm sure by now you know what a variable is. So it also gives us the number of observations and the number of variables, the size and the name of the file, and all the variable information, including the variable name, the type, the format. If it's a value label, that means all categorical variables and the variable label. So describe is very interesting. It's just saying describe the data for me. Let me have an understanding of what the data is all about. So it's very beautiful command to use. So let's move on. So you see it says describe values, which means it could be more than one variable or all. So and you see if that value is in square brackets, it means you may just if you exclude it, it will describe for the entire data set. So these are examples of how that command can be used. You can just type describe, which I mentioned will just do for the entire data set. So if you had 400 variables, it will describe the whole 400. But if you say, for example, in example 2, describe make, it only describes the make variable. If you say describe make and price, it only describes those two variables. So that is how it basically works. So when we start doing the practicals, we'll show you again how it all operates and works. Okay, let's move on to codebook. Now, codebook examines the variable names, the labels, and the data. Codebook examines the variable names, labels, and data. So this is the syntax for codebook. Codebook var list if and in. That means you can select a few variables or observations and do a codebook for that. Now this is a bit different from describe that cannot select some certain variables. So basically that's what codebook does, and that's how it differs from describe. So describe has some information that codebook does not have, and codebook has some flexibility that describe does not have. So it depends on what you want to do and what you want to achieve. So but it's just important to also see it's basically the same syntax or way. So you use codebook, it describes all the variables in the data set. Codebook make only one variable. Codebook make and price, those two variables will be used. So this is how it works. So in the practical session, we will show you in more detail how what information they give and how they help for clarity. The key goal is clarity. And for clarity, there are three kinds of labels we are looking at. We are looking at the variable label, the value label, and what we call the data label. Once those labels are in place, then your data is clear and we can use it for information. So yeah, that's it basically. Even though, yeah, so let's go through the what's the word? The practical session, and then we're able to explain more of these concepts to you. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the practical class. So hi there, welcome to the practical session. We'll be looking at two commands: describe, replace, and codebook. Codebook. I used replace wrongly. Okay, so I will start with the census data. So I clear first, just for best practices, though everything seems to be clear. And then cease use census. I've said this many times that this just means this combination of two lines is the same thing as just typing cease use census clear. So I'd explain that. So you could go to the previous modules if you're watching this video for the first time. And then yeah, so we have it all written out here. So let's run this. So when we do that, it gives us this chart. We can browse. Sorry, I use BR so I can see the data in like an Excel format. So that's the data there. Sometimes it's just good to put it on one half of the screen so we can see it also here. And then we'll switch between the main windows and the data editor. I always like to do file on one section, as you might have observed. Okay, so let's describe the data like we have just seen. Just type describe, that's all, and run. Now you don't get to see anything here because we're looking for clarity, isn't it? So we'll find that information in this window, the main window. So it tries to, the describe command tries to explain every single variable. Now, how do we know how many variables we have here? We have 13 variables and 50 observations. This is census, so all the states in America. So there's a variable called state, there's a variable called state 2, region, population, and all the other stuff. Population, urban, median age, I guess, death, marriage, divorce. So these are the numbers, and these are the labels. So this data is well labeled. There's no line that doesn't have a variable. I'm talking about label. Now the data set 2, when you open it, you can see there's 1980 census data by state. So the data itself, when it is opened, the first thing you see is that it has been labeled. So that's how it works. The census data also tells us the number of observations. You can see 50, and describe command, pardon me, tells me the observations, the number of variables, and the label again. This is the entire label here, and of course the day. I guess it was last saved. So this was last saved in the year 2020 in April. So that is what we have here, and all those details are very key. But the critical ones we're talking about now, the variable labels, we're looking for clarity. Another way to check, we've said that in the practical session, is let's look at this variable window very well, main window, so you can see all the labels. This is called label, all the labels all written out here, urban, rural, and all the other stuffs. Now I just, by clicking on it, had arranged it alphabetically. So, and then clicking, it just comes in the normal states which it came. So you may want to search for variables now. So that's it basically. We're looking at clarity now. So every variable has been labeled. Let's look at let's go back to the browse window, and all the categorical variables have properly been labeled too. So there's southwest, and all that. All the blacks are black. You can inspect that, and you see that everything seems to be in place. Now the most tricky thing is these categorical variables, because you have to be giving some context. So you could just see a particular column where they just labeled 1010, and you don't know what 1 stands for, what 0 stands for. We had that in the previous data set we did in the previous lessons, where we just had just one data set. So I think that data was I think national women. So that was NL SW. So let's look at that data set too. So you can see those dummy variables having 101010. So they could be labeled too, because anybody seeing that may not have an understanding of what 1 stands for and what 0. It's never married, so it should be categorical. The same thing I think with south, the same thing I think with city. So it's a dummy variable having a binary values of 0 or 1. So you need to inspect the data. So this data is not labeled, and we had done that in the previous lesson where we talked about labeling the variables. So we can as well just go and label. So there's labels missing on a categorical variable. So basically, for clarity, I would emphasize again, we want to be sure that all variables have labels, the data set has labels, and then all categorical variables have label. This is a categorical variable. This is not a quantity. So when it's saying never married 1, it's not saying they are 1 people, it's referring to a categorical variable. We had done that also. Unlike age is talking about a quantity, number of years. So basically, that is how it works. So we're not here to prepare or clean the data, as we call it, but we have checked and we have found out that some data don't have labels. Never Mind did not have labels. City South did not have labels and all that stuff. So you could just go back to the previous videos and check how we solved that problem. So that's how we check. I've explained that in detail now. I've also told you in previous classes that you can check the label here. This means lives in central city. If it's 1, that's yes. If it's 0, the person does not live in the central city. And these are about 2,246 individuals. The label for the data too can be found here. NLSW 1988 extract. So basically, this is how it works. And it's very important that you know this. It will greatly help you when you are trying to understand data. And if you find, I think of the 3 labels, the most tricky one is the categorical variables. If you find variables that are black that should be blue, then you should try and consult the person who gave you the data to tell you what it means. Sometimes it's very straightforward like this, where you know it's either a yes or a no kind of situation. But if it isn't, you need to get back to the person who gave data to say there are some variables that don't have label and you want to understand the context. So I keep talking about context and domain is very important when you're looking at data so that you don't misunderstand the data. That is it basically. So I hope this helps. I'll see you in the next lesson where we'll talk about keep and drop. Okay, so let's look at a few more commands. We did not use the word the code book, so let's use code book quickly. So let's run again. Now I had mentioned that for describe, just a minute with describe before I go to code book. For describe, you could add things like age and race. Make sure it's something that is in the data set, so it only will focus on those parts. So let me run and go and check the window here. So I could reduce this again so we can look at how it looks like. Remove the browse. So just age and race. So it just gives you for age and race, you're able to focus and zero in. And instantly you see that race has what we call a value label because it's a categorical variable. Just to refresh your memory, we can go back there. So there's race, black, white, so it's categorical and it's blue. The same thing with married. So if we added married to the describe, it will have, and let me do never married just to show you that never married does not have a label. Finally, so we run this, we go back to our main window. So all the 4 variables we selected, age, race, married, never married. Now you see that never married has no value label. So it means something has not been attached to it. And that is the race label. So there's a race label, there's a married label, and that's why you find them blue. Something has been attached. So it's one thing to have a label. It's another thing to have a label attached. We talked about that when we're talking about label definitions and then attaching the label to the variable. Very key. So codebook works something similar too. But I told you it doesn't give us much detail. So codebook does something similar. It works, of course, if you select it without mentioning a variable, it goes through all the variables and it takes them one by one. Describe puts the variables of interest in a table. But codebook, let's do the same exact things that we did for describe for. Let's just take, because of time, or because of space and clarity, let's take just 2 variables for describe again. Age and race. You see a small table, storage type, display format, value label, variable label, done. But codebook for the same thing for age and race. Let's look at what it looks like. Codebook, age and race. So just run that. Now what it does is that it picks age first, tells me what type it is, the minimum value of the age and the maximum value of age, even though that's not what we're looking for right now. But I can see clearly here that the age variable is labeled, it's not blank. And then it talks about all the percentiles of that particular variable. Just give you like a summary: the mean, if it has missings, if it has missing variables, if it has how many unique values it has, and then we have the race. The race has a label, so you can see label here. It's a categorical variable, and you can see the variable label here. So there's a value label and there's a variable label. They are all written here, and it tells us the breakdown of the frequency: 1637 white, 583 blacks, and 26 others. That's how it's written here in this particular data set. So basically, that's how they differ from each other. So codebook takes them variable by variable, break everything down. Describe puts all of them like in a small mini table and gives like some small summaries. So this is just basically to help us understand that if the data is clear or not. And thankfully, all those variables that require labels can be found. So that's how it works. I will see you in the next lesson. Thank you for listening.